Good evening. Welcome to the Jacob Hornberger Show. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Nice to be back with y'all for my weekly internet show. Have y'all noticed how boring the presidential campaign has become? Ever since the Republicans sort of settled on Mitt Romney as the inevitable nominee, things have just got totally boring. I mean, once Ron Paul got out of the picture effectively, he's still picking up delegates here and there, but effectively, I mean, everything has just died down into a state of boredom. Just sort of like a political quicksand where everybody just sinks down into the muck. I mean, you've got on foreign policy, you've got Obama. He's co-opted the Republicans by adopting all their positions, on the Guantanamo and denial of due process and waging the war on terrorism and continuing to occupy Afghanistan and bombing people everywhere and drone assassinations and who knows what else. A lot of it's secret, but that's the Republican game. And Obama co-opted that, and so boring. They all take the same position. The only thing that Romney can say is, "Hey, I would assassinate more people, or I would bomb more people, or I'd start more wars." And how exciting is that? And then of course you got Romney on domestic policies, no different from Obama. I mean, conservatives aren't any different from Obama. They favor Social Security, and they favor Medicare, and they favor Medicaid. And so the big battle is over the mandate, the healthcare mandate. And conservatives are saying we got to fight the mandate, and that's been their great glorious cause. Opposing the mandate. It's ridiculous because it's just a reform. The mandate's just a reform of the socialist program. And the fact is they both believe in this socialist program: Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, aid to dictatorships, the whole idea of the transfer society. And so, yeah, it's just boring. It's absolutely, totally boring. But notice what the Ron Paul campaign has done. I mean, it's put a terrible fear in statists everywhere. I mean, they tried to exclude him from the process, as they did with Gary Johnson, but they couldn't succeed with Ron Paul. And when he was in those debates, they saw the excitement that he was generating among a certain group of people that continued to grow over time, and especially young people, college-age students, people in their 20s, early 30s. I mean, you could see the excitement. Something was happening here. And it scared the mainstream press to death. It scared the mainstream op-ed writers. It scared the mainstream, Republicans and the Democrats. They saw something happening. And now they're all just like breathing a sigh of relief. Ron Paul's off on the side. They don't know what he's going to do at the convention, but it doesn't matter to him. That all that matters to him is this surge of libertarian excitement has sort of mellowed down here. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight, because I don't believe that surge is going to go anywhere. It's going to remain with us, much to the chagrin of the statists. They hope that this was just a one-time affair. It's just, a flash in the pan, going to go away, no problem. I don't think so. You see, for decades, libertarianism has been like this strong undercurrent in a sea of statism, and it's been below the surface, and more people over time have become attracted to libertarianism, and but people didn't notice it. You see, it's all below the surface, and then all of a sudden something like the Ron Paul campaign happens, and it rises to the surface, and it scares the heck out of statists. Where did this movement come from? What does it mean? What is Austrian economics? How come these people all seem to know about Ludwig von Mises and Frederick Bastiat and Friedrich Hayek, and they don't know what to make of it. And they, these libertarians seem committed to an overall philosophy, and they seem fervently committed to, in opposition to statism, socialism, interventionism. They're talking about things like the Federal Reserve, this socialist central planning monetary institution of the government. and the statists don't know what to make of it. And so, while things seems to have subsided, what we really need to recognize is that this is a movement that's growing and growing and growing. And now, I'm sure that the statists are hoping that all of these people that were excited about the Ron Paul campaign will just disappear. You see, they'll just go back into the woodwork. They'll become statists again. They'll be good little citizens. They'll support the troops and whatever the troops are doing, because that's defending our freedoms, you see. And they'll support Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the out of control spending and the out of control borrowing and the stimulus plans and the bailouts and all the statism. That's what they're hoping that the Ron Paul supporters, the libertarians in society, will do. But it ain't going to happen. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that tonight, as to why that's not going to happen, why it can't happen. You see, what distinguishes a libertarian from the rest of the statists is that we have broken through. I mean, we've been the subject of the same indoctrination of everybody else. Now, some people had the benefit of growing up in families whose parents were libertarians, and so they achieved their breakthrough like from birth. But for most people grew up in families where the parents are statists, and so they go along. But all of a sudden, some of us are able to break through the statism. And it's like breaking through, decades of indoctrination, where all of a sudden the scales fall from our eyes. We're seeing reality for what it is. We're seeing the truth, and we're realizing, hey, we've been lied to. And that has a monumental effect on a person, psychologically. This is what happened to me. I mean, I grew up in the age of statism. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and I went to public schools, and I pledged allegiance to the flag. I didn't know that the Pledge of Allegiance had been created by a socialist. Nobody told me that. And to me, public schooling was just natural. Nobody told me that it was a core feature of the Cuban socialist system. Nobody told me that it was a core feature of the North Korean communist system, or the Chinese communist system, or the Soviet communist system. All they told me was that this was freedom. That public schooling here was freedom. Public schooling over there was socialism or communism or statism. Well, I didn't think to question any of this. I mean, these are your parents who are sending you to these institutions. Of course, they're required to by law, the same way they are in communist countries. You can't just, especially back in the 50s and 60s, there was no such thing as homeschooling. In fact, if you tried to homeschool your children, they would come and haul you away as a parent. Or as a guy named Sanger learned, they shot him when he refused to send his kids to school and refused to obey court orders to send his kids into a public school. They just shot him. I mean, yeah, they called it resisting arrest, but it was there. They were there to enforce the court orders to send to make Sanger send his kids to school. So, I grew up in an age of statism, and never occurred to me to think anything about it. I mean, I believed that this was what America was all about, and when Lyndon Johnson was proposing Medicare and Medicaid, how was I supposed to know that this was something alien to America? I mean, this is the power of indoctrination. This is the power of state schooling everywhere. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the state demands the authority to bring children in at 6 years old into a state institution to be indoctrinated. Oh, yes, I know. They'll say, oh, no, it's to learn arithmetic, and it's to make sure they have a basic knowledge of math and science. It is nonsense. I mean, the reason for state schooling in places like North Korea, Cuba, United States, or wherever, is to make sure that there's a level of indoctrination there that goes very, very deep into the psyche of the child. I mean, that's what that Leon, I forget his last name, the Cuban kid that was over here. Both, governments were fighting over him. Well, no, the U.S. government finally turned him over to the Cuban authorities. Well, why did the Cuban authorities want him? To be able to indoctrinate him. into their version of statism, as compared to the state schools over here that would have convinced him that, oh no, the CIA is good and the CIA's assassination attempts on Fidel Castro were good. While over there, of course, the indoctrination goes in the opposite direction. Well, I learned all this. I believe that statism was part of American life, but more important, I didn't know it was statism. I thought it was freedom. You see, because that's what they teach you, right? In the first grade. Now, you may not be able to remember back that far, but I guarantee you that your school teachers told you year after year after year, maybe even after you said the Pledge of Allegiance, that you live in a free country, that you ought to be thankful that you live in a free country, that the troops have died overseas to protect your freedom. And so that goes really deep into the psyche and the mindsets, the subconscious of the American people. That they are free, that they live lives of freedom. Oh, by the way, it's no different in Cuba. It's no different in North Korea. I mean, if you went into North Korea right now and you interviewed some of the people, the ones that, just sort of like walk around like little drones and they praise the glorious leader and all that stuff, and you asked them, do you consider yourself free? And let's assume that they were totally safe to do that, a totally safe environment. I guarantee you most of them would say, of course we're free. How can it be otherwise? Why? Because the state has indoctrinated them with the notion that their society is a free society. I saw this firsthand when I was going to Cuba several years ago. I had to get permission to go there. Imagine that. Americans having to get permission to travel. But remember, we have freedom of travel and we have fundamental rights and we have the Declaration of Independence with God-given rights and so forth. But you got to ask for permission if you're going to travel to Cuba, spend money there, or Iraq during the time of the sanctions, or wherever else the government will not permit you to go. So you got to ask for permission, but that's freedom. Okay, remember, that's freedom. And so I had to get a visa from the Cuban authorities. And I went over there and told them what I wanted to do. I wanted to study the effects of the embargo, and I wanted to study their socialist system. I told them I was a libertarian. That apparently did not ring a bell with what that meant, because they gave me a journalist visa. And but I remember asking the guy, because I didn't want any problems over there. I said, "Is it okay?" They set up meetings for me with official foundations at the University of Cuba. And so I said, is it okay if I talk to regular people on the streets and interview them, take notes and whatever? And the guy in the Cuban interest section in Washington, which is the sort of the informal version of an embassy, says to me, he looks me straight in the eye and he scoffs. He says, you're going to discover that Cubans are freer than Americans will ever even hope to be. And you know something? I had no doubt that he believed it. He was absolutely convinced. He was as convinced that his society was free as the average American is convinced that his society is free. I mean, it was a fascinating thing. Interestingly enough, when I got to Cuba, the people in those foundations, most of them, they took that official mindset that they're like U.S. officials. Yes, this is a free society and this is a wonderful society, and we've had our problems, blah blah blah. But people on the street, they understood that this was not free. They understood this was a socialist system, and they understood that the world had passed them by economically. So they had a better grip on reality, interesting enough, than your average American. Because if you went out on the street and asked your average American, is this a free country? Man, he'd stand up proud and salute and say, man, thank God I'm an American. He'd break out in the song. He started, thank God I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. And so the Cubans had achieved a breakthrough, many of them, that saw the system for what it was. It was a socialist system. They got public schooling, they got Social Security, they got Medicare, they got Medicaid. They have the state running the society, running the economy. They got a job creator in chief, Fidel Castro, who was president at that time. I mean, just like, we have presidents here running for job creator in chief, where they say the president's job is to create jobs for Americans. Hey, in Cuba, they've been doing that for decades, ever since the Cuban Revolution. The job of the president there is to manage the economy, just like it's the president's job here. And part of that management is to create jobs for the populace. Well, the way they did it in Cuba, they just said, well, we're going to have the government do everything. It's going to run the businesses, going to run the industries. Everybody's going to be taken care of. They're going to have guaranteed housing, guaranteed jobs, and just everything's guaranteed. This was their concept of freedom. Well, one of the interesting things there in Cuba is that it's illegal to question the revolution. And that's the 1959 Communist Revolution, where Fidel Castro came into power, that you can't question that. And you can't question the communist system, the socialist system. You can't go in there and say, hey, let's advocate a libertarian society here. That's illegal, and it's a very grave offense. As an aside here, I kind of violated the law there. That I discovered one foundation there. It was absolutely fascinating. That they were different from all the other foundations, and they invited me out to dinner. It was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 of them, and we went out to dinner. They had their spouses there, and we started talking about people and principles, and they started mentioning Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, and I was stunned. One of them one day took me up to his house, and in he showed me his library, and there were books by Mises and Hayek and Friedman and others, and it's like it blew me away. I was figuring all this was illegal, and I asked the guy, I said, "What the heck's going on?" And he says, "Look, there are some of us here." He didn't use the word libertarian, but use the word liberal. We're liberals, which was, of course, the old word for libertarian before the leftists took it over. And he said, but as long as we couch our arguments in terms of reforming the revolution, reforming the system, we're safe. We can do that. We just can't talk in terms of opposing the revolution. Well, so when they gave me an opportunity to deliver some remarks before their foundation, and I said, well, I'm not here. I would not presume to know enough about your society to make comments or observations without really an in-depth study. But I can talk about our system in the United States that I'm thoroughly familiar with. And I said, in our country, the state runs the educational system. And it's a horrifying mess. They've been doing it for, a century or so, and everybody complains, but everybody's just set on reform, reform, reform. Nobody wants to talk about what the real solution to that is, and that's a free market in education. And then I said, and the government also runs much of the healthcare system with Medicare and Medicaid. And so I started going down the line of all our little socialistic programs, and I could tell they were all smiling because they knew what I was doing. I was indirectly criticizing the Cuban system, but pointing out the failures and fallacies of America's socialistic programs. So that was my little way of protest in Cuba. But notice that here, okay, yes, it's legal. It's protected by the Constitution. We have fundamental rights to advocate libertarianism, to advocate free markets. Nobody throws us in jail yet. So we still are not at that communist state, where you can't legally question, you can't question the Roosevelt Revolution and go to jail for it. And that's really the revolution that we're talking about in this country, the Roosevelt Revolution. That was where the government, the wholesale revolution in economic thinking, where the government job became managing the economy. It became taking care of people. That's where Social Security originated. I mean, here was the birth of the modern day welfare state. And when Johnson got Medicare and Medicaid, he pointed to Roosevelt and Social Security. So you've got this wholesale transformation of American life, but they don't talk about it like that. Like in the public schools and in the state-supported colleges and universities, they don't dare talk about it as a revolution. They say it was just a reform to save free enterprise. See, it was just a minor thing that they did. And that's what people are indoctrinated with. That's what goes on from the first grade. That the New Deal saved free enterprise, right? I mean, isn't that what everybody's taught? and that it's just, reforms, and that everything's just basically still the same as it always been. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. Well, I hit my late, and I believe in all this junk. I was a statist. I admit it. And then around 27, I had a breakthrough. I discovered libertarianism, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I never heard about this in college. I never heard about this in high school and elementary school and junior high school and law school. I mean, I didn't hear anything about this. That this isn't a free market, free society. This is a society that is adopted, embraced a welfare state way of life, which is as far away from the concept of freedom on which our country was founded that one could ever imagine. I mean, now the government's job is to take care of you. That wasn't the whole idea. That's not economic liberty. That's not freedom. Freedom is keeping everything you earned, deciding for yourself what to do with it, whether you want to donate it to the poor, help your parents out. Freedom is that right to have that choice. And here's the welfare state is mandating it. You don't pay your Social Security taxes, we put you in jail, or worse. You don't pay your Medicare taxes, we put you in jail, or worse. You don't comply with all of the things that the welfare state requires, and you're sunk. Well, you can't imagine the effect this had on me. I mean, I was just like stunned. And I realized at that point I had been lied to. I've been lied to for 27 years that this is freedom, that statism is freedom, that it's not statism, it's free market, it's free enterprise. When the state takes care of you and the IRS comes out and abuses you and you've got to fill out your tax returns and rush to the post office and file your return. And, I learned that America for more than a century didn't even have an income tax, didn't even have a Federal Reserve. The official money of the country was gold and silver coins. Nobody had told me that people had chosen gold and silver coins, not a gold standard with paper money backed by gold. That's nonsense. The gold standard had nothing to do with paper money backed by gold. They still teach that in colleges and universities, high schools. No, the gold standard was simply people using gold and silver coins as their money. And nobody had told me that. And all of a sudden now I'm realizing at 27, I've been lied to. And I didn't like it. I mean, I was angry over the fact. I mean, it'd been one thing if they had said, look, from the first grade up, you now live in a statist society. The Roosevelt Revolution changed America's economic system. Okay, maybe we should have gotten a constitutional amendment, but we didn't. We adopted a new system and live with it, deal with it. We abandoned the principles of economic liberty on which this country was founded. Okay, that would at least be reality. I mean, that's the people I was talking to in Cuba. They understood this is a socialist system, and they don't like it, but they're dealing with it. Here, everyone's convinced that it's freedom, and including me until I'm 27. And I'm like, what garbage is this? I've been lied to all this time. And so that motivated me, partly motivated me, also just the thirst of knowledge at this point, but to study more and more about libertarianism. And you see, that's what's happening with all these young people that are now, excited about the Ron Paul campaign. You can tell these are educated people, and they didn't get educated in school. I guarantee you, they didn't learn libertarianism in their social studies class in high school. The teacher there, if he starts talking about drug legalization or ending the drug war or ending foreign occupations or ending Social Security, there's going to be calls to the school board immediately. The state families are going to raise Cain. They're going to go to the school board, and that teacher's not going to be long for this world. I mean, teachers learn that you don't question the revolution. Okay? They're not going to be sent to jail if they do, but the pressure is there that in public schooling, you don't teach libertarian principles. You teach statist principles, and you tell people that it's freedom. But you see, the flaw in all this is that more and more people are breaking through, especially the young people. They're breaking through and they're laughing. They realize every time a teacher says statism is freedom, it's not really statism. The Roosevelt Revolution saved free enterprise. The Federal Reserve had nothing to do with causing the Great Depression. Libertarians laugh because we've read Mises, we've read Hayek, we've read Friedman, we've read Benjamin Anderson, we've read the Austrian school. We've read Rothbard, Frank Shutteroff. I mean, Ayn Rand. I mean, we've read the people that knew better. Henry Hazlitt, the people that knew better and people that know better. And so once those things fall, the scales fall from my eyes, how do you put the scales back on? You see, so the statist hope that, oh, libertarians are just going to disappear after the Ron Paul campaign, that's just inanity, because you can't put the scales back on once you break through. That's it. You've got a grip on reality. You've got a grip on truth. Now, there's statists that know better. I mean, they know what we know, but they just love statism. And one of their biggest weapons has been able to convince people that statism is freedom. But what happens as our group gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger is all of a sudden other people start questioning this notion of what kind of system do we have? Is it a free system? Is it a statist system? And that's why they're so angry about us libertarians, because they know that we're causing people to think, and when people think, they achieve breakthroughs. And you can see it in foreign policy too, like when we're going to hear it all Monday, all the troops died for freedom. We got to honor the troops because they died so that we could be free. That's just inanity. I mean, it's just falsehood. I mean, this is part of what I was angry about, these lies that whatever troops do overseas, no matter what war they're involved in, is for freedom, right? I mean, they all died for freedom. I mean, it's ridiculous. Show me how the troops who died in the Spanish-American War in 1898 died for the freedom of the American people. I mean, that was the turn toward empire. Here the U.S. government goes into Cuba, where it had nothing, no legitimate role there. Nobody had attacked the United States. It was to subjugate Cuba under U.S. control. The troops that died in the Philippines, that wasn't to our freedom here at home. Freedom wasn't threatened. No nation, the Spanish Empire had not invaded the United States. It was to subjugate the Filipinos so that, the U.S. could have military bases there. Bases that, oh, by the way, in World War II would be taken over by the Japanese. I mean, notice that nobody asked that. What were troops doing in the Philippines? What was MacArthur doing in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor? What do the Philippines have to do with the United States? Nobody asked that. It's just sort of like, well, because it's freedom. It's freedom to have troops in the Philippines. And World War I, I forget how many tens of thousands of people died in World War I. I mean, 70, 80,000. I mean, what did that have to do with freedom for the American people? The Kaiser wasn't invading the United States. He wasn't, coming over here with planes or anything. I mean, those men in World War I died for nothing. Just for nothing. No, not for our freedom, not for our rights, not so that we can be here speaking out. They died for nothing. And in fact, U.S. intervention, as libertarians have long pointed out in World War I, gave rise to the conditions that gave rise to Hitler. And so then all of a sudden, the World War II was really a continuation of World War I. And people say, well, okay, but the Japanese attacked. We were defending, unlike, the Spanish-American War and World War I. Okay, so be it. But how come very few people except libertarians, some conservatives, some liberals, talk about what Roosevelt was doing to provoke the Japanese? Because he believed that the American people were wrong and opposed an entry into World War II, and so he was trying his best to involve the United States in World War II. And okay, so it's not real clear. There's no black and white evidence that he knew they were going to attack at Pearl Harbor, but I think everyone concedes that Roosevelt was doing his very best to get them to attack somewhere so that he could say, we've been attacked, we've been attacked. And then, of course, World War II, ends up with the Soviet Union, America's ally, controlling all of Eastern Europe, half of Germany, and that's the justification for this huge Cold War, giant national security state, North Korea, Vietnam, dominoes are going to fall. Later, the war on terrorism, the whole national security state, revisited again, this time with terrorism instead of communism. This is all nonsense. This is imperialism. This is statism. This is interventionism. This has absolutely nothing to do with freedom. But that's what the indoctrination is. That's what the statism is. And that's why we libertarians You know, we can sit back for a while, maybe watch his campaign work out, but we've got to redouble our efforts. Because what we do is we create this great big mass. We find more people that are attracted to libertarians, people that are breaking through. And you never know when the next opportunity arises where all of a sudden libertarianism rises to the surface again and takes the world by storm. And as we all know, most politicians are chameleons. They're going to go with whatever public opinion goes for. And as that critical mass reaches bigger and bigger and bigger mass of people, the chameleons will come over too. And that's when all of a sudden we see a giant shift toward freedom and away from the statist paradigm. And think about it. If they could adopt statism and cause Americans to abandon the principles of economic liberty, we can do the reverse. We can get a giant mass that overcomes the statist paradigm, especially since it's proven to be such a disaster and so immoral. And we can bring the world over to the libertarian paradigm, the free market paradigm, the limited government paradigm, the republic paradigm, and reject, of course, the statism, the imperialism, the fascism, you know, all the government managing the economy and all the rest of the statist nonsense. So that's the show. Thanks so much. You know, have a great rest of the weekend here, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.